Tom Rodrigue, and I am the floodplain manager for unincorporated Jefferson Parish. I'm also the community rating system coordinator for unincorporated Jefferson, and I'm the chief agent for all hazard mitigation grants for the entire parish of Jefferson. Well, I would have to tell you, in Jefferson Parish, our population prior to the storm was somewhere in the neighborhood of 480,000. I would tell you today we're probably larger than 480,000 because we've had a lot of people migrate from Orleans and other places to Jefferson, and I would say we probably pushing the 500,000 population plateau right now. In fact, Jefferson Parish is now the largest parish in Louisiana. Maps do not change that frequently. I can tell you the first maps in Jefferson Parish were in 1976, and that's right around the time the National Flood Insurance Program came into being. The next update to those maps was in March of 1995. So as you can see, that's about 19 years before the maps were updated. Now, we were in a process prior to Katrina of updating all the flood insurance rate maps for Jefferson Parish because of what we've spent on drainage projects since 1995 with the parish's capital projects program and the SEALA program, Southeast Louisiana Urban Flood Control Program. We had spent over $700 million in drainage projects since 1995. So therefore, the parish president at that time felt that we probably needed to try and update the maps again because it might help people with their flood insurance premiums. When homeowners want to call and they want to inquire as to what flood zone they reside in, I basically, take their address, determine where they're located, and then take and compare that to the flood insurance rate map, which actually tells me, what the zone is in their particular area. And I used, a Microsoft Streets and Trips, which is a commercial software, which will give me the exact location of the property so that I can, differentiate, with the map to make sure that I'm giving them an accurate assessment of their flood zone, and then what the base flood elevation of that flood zone is. Then the next thing is I have to ask them, do they have a FEMA elevation certificate, so that I can tell them how their particular structure matches to that base flood elevation of the flood zone, whether it's at or above or below the base flood, because that's very important.
The new maps will be digital. Will that impact you at all?
Well, yes, it will. It will make it a lot easier for homeowners to access the maps in order to obtain the information they're looking for. Like for Jefferson Parish, there's like 21 different panels. They're 2 feet by 3 feet, so every time you determine where somebody lives, you got to go find that panel, you got to open it up, and you got to read that map. Whereas the digital, I mean, you go on a computer and you could do it.
But emotionally too.
Absolutely, absolutely, because yes, there is an emotional element involved here, and I've heard just about every story you could possibly hear in talking to these people, because every one of those over 1,000 ICC claims, I personally talked to each and every one of those homeowners, and then you have those homeowners over and above those that applied for FEMA mitigation money. They may not necessarily, in some cases, didn't have flood insurance, but because they were substantially damaged, they were eligible to apply for the hazard mitigation grant program in southeast and southwest Louisiana.
And so, just to kind of repeat what I had said before, in order to live here, people will have to what, like over the next, say, 25, 50 years?
We're going to have to consider building higher, which right now, the 3 foot above highest adjacent grade rule is forcing that to happen under the FEMA advisory base flood elevation guidance that was released last year and adopted by Jefferson Parish. So I mean, people are building higher now than they would have in the past as a result of the storm. Some people are deciding they want to go much higher than that. I mean, in other words, they want to make the first floor their second floor and have the area underneath for parking and storage and not living area anymore. And there's a lot of that going on too throughout the parish. Well, I would tell you, you know, as far as building to new standards, I think we all understand why we now have to build smarter and higher than what we did in the past if we want to prevent a reoccurrence of what we experienced during Katrina and Rita. I would tell you that to me that's a given. I would tell you that estimated number of homes that, because we don't specifically know exactly how many homes flooded, but it's anywhere between 21 and 25,000 people flooded during Hurricane and Katrina in Jefferson Parish alone.
Do you have a standard sort of a speech that you give people if some guy comes to you and say, look, I know I'm on a slab, I know I flooded several times, I just, you know, just let me rebuild, you know, what do you have a sort of an explanation or an answer for that?
Well, first of all, in other words, what you have to do is determine whether or not the structure is substantially damaged. Because in other words, if it's not substantially damaged, then he can get a permit and he can repair and basically stay where he is. Now, if he falls into the substantial damage category and his structure is below the required base flood elevation, then it's mandatory that he elevate based on the Jefferson Parish floodplain ordinance. Oh yeah, without flood insurance and the maps that tell us, you know, how high we need to build, I mean, it would have been absolutely devastating down here. I mean, to me, there would be hardly any recovery at all going on. I mean, I would tell you, you know, as a floodplain manager, probably, you know, the biggest lesson learned is, and I would say it's two-part. One is to encourage people to have flood insurance. Secondly, if you're not in compliance, mitigate your structure to protect not only your belongings but your structure as well. And that's probably the two biggest lessons learned that I would tell you out of the Katrina experience.
So any idea how many people who might not be in a floodplain now, technically speaking, but they probably flooded a lot, then they turn around and the new maps come out and they're in a flood area, and what do? How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, the National Flood Insurance Program allows what they call a grandfather clause. If for some reason prior to the map revision you were in an X zone, which is a non-special flood hazard area, and the map changes and it puts you into what they call a special flood hazard area, which in Jefferson Parish would be an A zone or a V zone. If you can produce a copy of the previous map which shows that you were in a non-special flood hazard area at one time, then the insurance company is allowed to give you what they call a grandfather exception, which means you would not get a preferred risk rate, but you would get something in between a preferred risk and what the maximum would be for being in a special flood hazard area. So, and in essence, a lot of citizens come to me as the floodplain manager because I'm the guy that maintains the current maps, the old maps, and I can provide that information, and I provide them with copies of that map and the letter indicating that they should be eligible for a grandfather clause and they should take this information that I give them to their insurance company in order to determine if they, you know, if they'll grant them a grandfather clause.
You know.
Yeah. In other words, if someone has a policy that's in existence, they should not be impacted as greatly as someone who has never had a policy or who is just getting a policy for the first time. So those people that have policies already could be impacted, you know, somewhat, but not as great as somebody who never had a policy or is getting a policy, for the first time.